Let's start with something different today. We're going to talk about the conflict or the tension or the hypocrisy or the double standard that exists between two sides of the left wing. Tell me if this is interesting. Tell me if you're interested in more segments like this. Now, here are the two wings of the left that I want to compare today. You have your anti-capitalist left, and then you have your woke left. And I'm not using any of these terms pejoratively. By the anti-capitalist left, we mean the anti-capitalists, the Marxists, the communists, the socialists that exist in that space. And by the woke side, I mean the critical, postmodern, identity-based left. I'm going to tell you what each subscribes to, and then we will talk about this. Now, there are many on the left who casually believe themselves to be both anti-capitalists and woke, or maybe we call it a postmodern critical identity part of the left. What I want to argue today is that these are two fundamentally different ideologies that actually conflict significantly with each other. And many of the people on the left who at least believe that they are both anti-capitalist and woke as defined by critical postmodern are maybe, I don't want to say confused, but maybe just unaware of what these ideologies are. So let's start first with the anti-capitalist left. Sometimes they are Marxists or communists or socialists. The core idea here is we are against capitalism at its core. Now, they aren't exactly the same. Marxism, based on the theories of Karl Marx, criticizes capitalism's inherent inequality. It foresees a class struggle that will eventually lead to a classless society. Communism is a political and economic ideology. It wants a society where property is publicly owned. Everybody works and is paid according to their abilities and their needs. And then socialism may be the least extreme of these, for lack of a better term, and socialism wants to socialize the means of production and distribution and exchange. It should be regulated by the community as a whole, not by the government, as communism might say, but by the community as a whole. So that's our anti-capitalist side. We then have the woke, critical, postmodern identity side. And this has its roots in becoming awakened to social injustice, especially as related to race and other identities. It now has kind of broadened, and it means we are most concerned with social inequality, and that includes inequality based on gender, inequality based on sexuality, race, ethnicity, and other forms of identity. And the critical postmodern identity-based ideas really come out of critical theory and postmodernism. It's a very different origin than the anti-capitalist ideology. And the critical side of this focuses on power dynamics, social construction of identity, critiquing universal narratives, emphasizing the lived experience of the individual. That's where identity politics come from, and recognizing the inequalities that come from identity. So the tension between these two sets of ideas is not trivial. If we think about economic ideas versus identity focus, on the anti-capitalist side, the focus is we have a class struggle based around economic inequality. We want to redistribute wealth to achieve a classless society. On the woke, critical, postmodern side, the priority is identity and cultural dimension of inequality. So the emphasis is we recognize and we validate identity and experience. There's much more of a focus on race and other identity factors. That's a significant difference in approach, and we'll get back to that. If we talk about universalism versus particularism, Marxism and anti-capitalism is far more universal in its approach to societal change. We have shared economic conditions. We need class solidarity. It's much more reductionist economically. On the other hand, when we talk about woke and critical identity, it's about the particulars of this group has this experience based on race, gender, and sexuality. This other group has a very different experience. And even all middle-class people have very different experiences, and thus the approach should be different based on race, sexuality, gender, etc. One other element of difference, materialism and culturalism. The Marxist anti-capitalist critique is materialist. It focuses on the economic structure, the relationships between classes. The woke critical identity perspective, on the other hand, is way more culturalist. It wants to examine language and, Latin X. Latin X is something that exists on the woke critical side. Latin X is not something you would find on the anti-capitalist Marxist side. Cultural practices and how they perpetuate inequality, etc. Okay, now let's be thorough. Can you synthesize both of these ideologies into something that kind of encompasses both? You can certainly do it, right? I mean, you can basically say, I'm both anti-capitalist and woke. My critique in general is an anti-capitalist critique, but then you layer identity on top of it, and I want to kind of deal with both. You can do that. The problem is that it's a little bit low effort to find what are actually two competing ideologies based on very different scholarship and say, I kind of subscribe to both where they overlap. And especially it can be difficult to do because you come up against really specific conflicts when you look at particular issues. So like, for example, if we look at free speech and cancel culture, there is a tension between advocating for free speech and in general, you see free speech as a value upheld by traditional leftists. There's a difference between saying we're going to uphold free speech, period, as essential to democratic society and to class struggle, versus, on the other hand, the view that is more common on the woke critical postmodern side, which is sometimes you've got to deplatform, sometimes you've got to cancel. We need to consider that as a tool. And what that can lead to is a conflict in terms of what's the acceptable discourse. When we talk about criticisms of capitalism or discussions about identity, if you have this conflict as to the speech is part of the class struggle, the proletariat has it, and we need to maintain it for everybody, versus actually sometimes you've got to deplatform, sometimes you've got to cancel, sometimes you've got to limit. You might have a speaker advocating for radical economic reforms and they get invited to a university. But if they don't consider that race, gender, and sexuality are a part of that, you may see the woke critical side say, this is not someone who should be allowed to speak because their view reduces to class and doesn't include those identity elements. Okay, that's an example. I'll give you another example. Intersectionality versus class reductionism. This is a tension between the anti-capitalists and the woke postmoderns. Intersectionality is a key component of the woke ideology. It says overlapping social identities are complex, race, gender, sexuality, and sure, we include class in that as well. When you try to combine that with the anti-capitalist view, you can be accused on the anti-capitalist side of just being a class reductionist. And it is absolutely the case that on the anti-capitalist side, as envisioned by Marx and others, you don't really deal in the same way with, well, if you're a black lesbian lower middle class, that is very different than white lower middle class. The approach is different, the solutions, the critique, it's all different. That doesn't exist historically on the anti-capitalist side. So again, it's easy to say, well, I believe in both. It doesn't strike me as the most serious thing to take two ideologies that conflict and say, I believe in both. I find it to be sort of low effort. Now, I'll tell you how my ideology interlocks with this. I'm a social democrat. Social democracy diverges from both anti-capitalist and woke critical identity-based ideology. Social democracy, which is what I subscribe to, advocates for democracy within a capitalist framework with significant regulation, significant state intervention to ensure social welfare, equitable distribution of resources, equality of opportunity, and it wants to balance efficiency, innovation within the market with the need for social justice and protecting people against economic and social insecurity. So social democrats usually would support a strong welfare state, progressive taxation, comprehensive public services. We want a high standard of living for all citizens, regardless of economic contribution and regardless of identity factors. So the social democracy has capitalism as a base. Marxism, communism, and socialism want to overhaul or abolish capitalism. Social democracy accepts the capitalist system, and we want to humanize it by managing the excesses instead of dismantling it entirely. Reform over revolution is a big difference as well. Social democrats want to reform through democratic means the problems that we have. There is a more revolutionary view from the anti-capitalist group often. And we can kind of go through the list. I think most people in my audience understand social democracy. So I'm curious to hear from those in the audience, what do you make of this conflict? And why hasn't this tension come to the forefront to the degree that it should based on the ideologies that these movements come from? Even when you look at pragmatism over purity, when you look at the woke critical side, social democracy is far more pragmatic and doesn't tend to fall into these purity tests and litmus tests, whereas the woke critical postmodern side often does. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know if these sorts of discussions are interesting. Where do you hear yourself falling within this spectrum of the left? And remember, this is all on the left. Every movement I just mentioned are movements on the left. Let me know your thoughts and we can follow up the discussion. You've heard me talk before about the show's financial accounts being hacked. It is a horrible experience. It can happen to anyone. Look at the stats, and our sponsor, Aura, gives you peace of mind. Aura is the all-in-one solution to keep your accounts safe. Aura scans the dark web for your personal info, emails, passwords, social security numbers, and alerts you if anything is found and helps you fix the problem fast. You also get alerts about suspicious credit inquiries. Aura protects all of your devices from malware with state-of-the-art antivirus, and Aura helps you manage what your kids can do on their devices with really easy-to-use parental controls. You can try Aura for free for 2 weeks at aura.com/Pacman. Your usernames and passwords could already be floating around. It takes just seconds to find out using Aura's free trial, so you can change your passwords if you need to. The link is down below.